First off, everybody, welcome to this panel that it sort of came about at the last minute. I was going to be a guest. I was laying in bed late one night, and then I go, hey, I wonder who some of the other guests are. And I went through and I saw that Jim was going to be here, Jim Lee. And so I went, what? Jim Lee's going to be there, and he's doing a panel. Why don't we just do one panel, right? Why don't we just have some fun, which is what the intent of this is. And just sort of have two friends that have been in the industry for a long time, just chit-chatting about stuff that is sort of some of the behind-the-scenes stuff, both good, bad, or indifferent, and essentially do sort of a public podcast, right? You guys are the audience. Jim and I are just going to sit here. My theory is, and hopefully Jim will go for it, is the theme to me is X, right? And given that he set that record for X-Men, it's actually good. And so, here's why I say X. Because if you take the bottom of an X, that's the furthest two people, in this case, Jim and I, are apart from each other. This is, and we'll talk about it, the beginning of our careers, right? Jim is starting, I don't know where he's living or why he wants to get into comic books, we'll get into it. I'm over here, and eventually we both get into comic books, and our careers go, and we hit the cross. And that becomes Image Comic Books. Again, we'll talk about that. And then from Image Comic Books, eventually, as we start getting older, our paths begin to diversify, and we go, again, in our own direction, and we can talk about that. So there's sort of like a beginning, a middle, and an end here, and I just thought that we would have some fun stories to tell. And with that, let's bring up Mr. Jim Lee! Test. Oh. So we're going to have to get even here, because here's what happened. Because Jim and I are always trying to outthink each other. He's an executive for DC. He was doing a panel for DC. So I said, hey, I usually dress down. I'm going to put on my jacket because I want to look as good as Jim, because I know Jim's going to look sharp coming from his executive panel.
Wait, I think I look sharp, but...
But Jim said he had a jacket, but he goes, I'm going to be on a panel with Todd, and he always dresses down. He's a schmuck, so he's going to dress down. So we actually ended up flipping. So he looks like me, I look like him, so I'm taking my damn jacket off.
I was just trying to make you feel comfortable, you know. You're not going to sit down, right?
I'm not going to sit.
Yeah, I knew you weren't going to sit down.
No.
So that means I have to stand up.
Like this. So
I usually sit down my panels, but it's okay.
That's it. So.
I have lots of things in my pockets.
I got stuff.
I want my silhouette to look good.
Cash. Oh, he's got a credit card. So, Jim.
Warner Brothers credit card. Anyone need a private jet somewhere?
So here's. I'm going to ask you some questions. You can ask me whatever you want. We have nothing planned here. There are actually questions I don't know, right? After all these years, right? We've both been at it now for close to 40 years. Why and how did you get into comic book? I mean, obviously, I'm always telling my story, but I don't know, like, at what point did you go, I want to get into this profession, and how did you get in? I don't even know that story.
Gosh, I was like 10 years old, and I remember you on The Incredible Hulk, and I was like, wow, this guy's really good.
Hold on a second. How old are you?
I was 10 or 8 maybe, I think. No, Todd is a peer of mine. I was born in Seoul, South Korea, and I remember watching Superman cartoons. Max Fleischer, I don't know, I'm way too old, but they're fantastic. They're on YouTube, I think. And so I knew of Superman, and I was already engaged with superheroes at the time, and I was like 3-4 years old. And I had a art teacher come to the house, and we would draw. So I've been drawing for as long as I remember, and I've been associated or engaged or entranced by superheroes for as long as I can remember. Then we moved to Warren, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, when I was 4 and a half. And when I came here, I didn't speak any English, new culture, everything was different. And but there was one thing that was something I recognized and super familiar, and that was Superman. And so I immediately gravitated to comics. And I think at the time, or for a long time, even as an adult, I thought I was into this stuff because they're powerful characters, it's a power fantasy, who wouldn't want to be Superman and have X-ray vision and fly through the skies? But I think now, as an older person, looking back on it, I think those comics really represented an emotional escape, right? Like, imagine going to school and everyone's looking at you weird and you don't understand what they're saying, and the anxiety you would have, and just like how tense and stressful that would be. But I get home, I open the comic book, I see a character I know, I go into this other world where it's all like these crazy adventures, and it was escape, I think, from everyday sort of anxiety and all that kind of surrounded it. So I think it was really an emotional escape for me, and that's why I really gravitated towards comics.
So did you collect comic books then from that moment on nonstop till you broke in?
No, so my parents hated comic books, which was an impediment. But I remember back then, you go to the barber and they would have a pile of comics on the table to kind of keep the.
Oh yeah, that's right.
And I remember it was an issue of Tarzan, him fighting a cheetah, and I tried to find that comic book, but there's almost every third Tarzan comic, he's fighting a cheetah. But I remember that image itself, and then. Again, I didn't have an allowance. My parents were really fond about me reading comics, and I would basically steal, beg, borrow. There were a bunch of other kids in the neighborhood that had comics. There was this one older kid that had literally a cardboard box, like a big box, and all the comics were just piled in there, not even bagged and board, just a pile of comics, and we'd go in and give them a nickel and grab a comic, and that's.
Okay, so let me ask you a question, because again, I ran into this when I was younger, before I broke into comic books too. When people found out that you collected comic books, I started collecting at 16, later.
Yeah, you were later.
They thought that, like...
Because you were a jock.
Yeah, I was a jock, but,
Yeah.
but when they found out that you were collecting comic books, they thought like you were mentally arrested or something, right? Because comic books
might be true.
Comic books aren't the same thing,
Not you.
right? So I don't know if it was the same. Let me also say what was odd, to me, the people that would make fun of me with my comic collection,
Sure.
even 16, 17, they're going, oh, Todd, oh, you collect comics. Right?
Sure.
They look at each other side eyes and roll their eye, and they're going, oh. And then I'd say, what are you doing? And they're going, oh, we're going to go to Star Wars, and then Indiana Jones, and then we're going to go to that James Bond movie that, where the car jumps off and it goes on the ski. Like, they could have their fantasy.
Yeah.
According to me, they could have their fantasy that was perfectly okay. I guess because it was out in the theaters and everybody was doing it, but I couldn't have my fantasy at that point. So you have to sort of hide it away from people.
Sure.
It wasn't near,
Yeah, well, James Bond didn't wear underwear on the outside of his pants. I think that was a big piece of it. No, but same thing. I was into comics, but back then it was really a secret passion. I literally had my comics in the closet. That's how.
Mine too.
Yeah, and
mine too.
Yeah.
I told this story, and then when my girlfriend, first time I opened it up, and there was like
You had a girlfriend? What the? Wow. You did it right.
Oh, okay, hold a
wow.
second. Let me just talk about this for one moment.
I made up for it. I have 9 kids. Don't worry. It's all good.
Usually you collect comics, then you get the girlfriend. I did the opposite. I got the girlfriend, and then I got the comic books, then I got the girlfriend. But anyway, the first time she saw it, they were in the closet.
That's right.
Literally.
Yeah.
And I opened it up. I told the story yesterday. I opened it up, and to her horror, she was just starting to date me. She went, "What's that?" I went, "What? Those books? They're my brother's." And so she put up with it. She eventually found out they were mine.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But she was okay, and I converted her, and she ended up being the editor on the first sort of independent Spawn comic book I did. And on July 27th, I will be celebrating my 40th anniversary with that young lady. And she's here someplace. Okay, thank you. Oh, there's Wanda. Stand up, Wanda. Miss Wanda.
Wait, Wanda was your first editor?
No, like, hold it, Wanda
Yeah.
was the first editor of my first comic book that I did, like when I was 17. I did a Spawn comic book when I was 17.
Yeah.
She was the editor, and then years later, in '92, she was also the editor on Spawn #1 when we started Image.
Oh, wow, okay. I didn't
So
know
if you
that.
want her autograph,
Yeah. What's your rate, Wanda? I want to get a CGC. So, yeah, no, but my comics were literally also in the closet.
Yep.
And I would come home every now and then from high school, and they were no longer in the closet. And I'd say, Mom, where are the comics? And she would point to the trash can outside. Yeah,
Mom.
at least twice.
Here's the story you never hear.
Yeah.
Dad threw out all your shit. Dad never does that. It's always
No,
Mom.
nowadays, guys are skateboarding
throwing
in
away
their 50s.
billions of dollars of cards, comic books, video games. Mom,
I had action
the
number
GDP
one.
of this country would be much higher if you didn't clean up shit.
Yeah. So, or one time we got into, I was coming back from a friend's house, and I had like 3 or 4 friends that secretly collected and read comics, and I would go over and have a play date or whatever. And then one time in Missouri, St. Louis, where I grew up, we got in a car accident, and it was snowing, it was dark. And,
I'm Canadian. We know how to drive in that.
Huh? No, I wasn't driving. My dad
Oh, okay.
drove the accident. But we had to wait. Like back then, we actually waited for the police to come and file a report. But we were in the middle of the road, and to get the cars off the road, we pulled them off the side. But to basically show where the cars were, he took my comic books and placed them where the wheels were. I still have the comic. It's encased in salt and mud and everything. And so that's what they thought of comics. They hated it. They would indulge me just to keep me quiet. It's sort of like the iPad back in the day, right? Like you buy a 25-cent comic, and your kid would be quiet for a 3-hour drive or whatever.
So let's talk about parents just for a second, of whether how much they supported or they didn't support. I've told the story before, and it's weird because when I repeat it back to my parents when my mom was alive and even my dad, they don't have any recollection of this moment that to me was very big. At some point, they asked me, "Hey Todd, I wanted to play baseball. I still play baseball. I keep threatening I'm going to post my schedule here. We just recently moved to Altadena and the Pasadena area, my wife and I, and I still play baseball, hardball, right, with a bunch of 30-year-olds. But they knew I wanted to play baseball. But they also said, well, if that doesn't work out, what do you want to do? And I said, because I was collecting the comic books, right, at that point, they knew, I want to be an artist. And the thing that they did that they don't really recall, they go, oh, I did, is I said that, and like 3 months later at Christmas, underneath the Christmas tree was a drafting table to draw on. Basically, I took it as, if I said I wanted to play baseball, they would have got me a glove. If I wanted to be a drummer, they would have got me a drum set. I said I want to be an artist, they go, well, you got to have something to draw on. Let's get you a table. That table, I drew every single page. I still have the table today. I drew every single page of Spider-Man, Hulk, Batman on that table that they gave me. And they don't know that the impact that support has, right? I will give you, real quickly, Jim, and then you can tell me about your parents. I'll give you the horror story. I just told it to a mom earlier today. The horror story in my career was I was at a convention, and at that point, remember, they didn't sort of give tickets, so they didn't cut off the line. It was just first come, first served. Remember those ones that would be like 7-8 hour lines?
Yeah.
Right? So I was at a show, and the show was supposed to end at like 5 o'clock, pre cell phones, pre-internet, so we're going back. And the way that I guess it would work with my parents is they'd just say, hey, pick me up at 5, go stand by that sign. And you had a visual that you were getting picked up at. Okay, show ends at 5, there's still a bunch of people. I say, hey, if they want to stay, I'll finish signing them. And at the end, at about 5:30, this kid comes up, must have been about 10, 11, and he walks up, I'll never forget it, it just burnt in my brain. He walks up and his hands are shaking and he's got a pristine copy that had just come out not long ago of Amazing Spider-Man 300. And I signed it and he had a big smile on his face. And then as I'm finishing signing, I hear, Jimmy! 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 And then his mom comes right up behind him and goes, where have you been? I've been waiting for you. And she goes, is this your book? And he goes, yeah. And it was a double side. You guys know Spider-Man 300, it's a double side. And she took it and she folded it in half. And then, I didn't think this was possible, folded it again, shoved it in her purse, and go, let's go. And she left, and that kid burst into tears. He'd been waiting 7 hours for this thing that was precious to him, that was important to him. And Mom, for whatever reason, didn't care. And she broke his heart, and unfortunately probably created a serial killer. This is the thing that moms don't know. So whenever I see parents supporting their kids, geekdom here at these shows, I'm always thankful, because I go, I don't think you know how important it is that you're okay with us being geeks.
Yes.
So I don't know how your parents.
No, you guys have it a lot easier.
Our parents. Around the clock.
Yeah, no, like I said, my parents were not supportive of me reading comics. My dad was a doctor. He was the first of his entire family to immigrate to the United States. They came here for their American dream, for a better life. They wanted me to be a doctor. I don't know if there are any Asians here, but I think I'm the only person that actually had that kind of experience. So I've heard. It's a very common thing. Like, they're like, you can be a doctor, maybe a lawyer, and if you have to settle, engineer, right? Like, it was like really, like, wow, it's just brutal. And everything they bought, like, they would buy a lamp. I said, Jim, we bought you this lamp so you can study harder to get to medical school. And everything, like, we got you this chair so you can study better. And
he said, what about Doc Ock? What about Dr. Doom? Right.
So I had to buy my own damn drafting table. And I bought it at Kmart for like $150 after I graduated college. I still have that table today. I drew all of X-Men on that table. It's not the tools. It's literally, and it's got all these notes and phone numbers all over it. No, they just really did not understand that anyone can make a living drawing pictures. And I think that was the big fear, is that, you know, everyone thinks about an artist and it's the stereotypical starving artist, and they just did not, that's not why they came to America ultimately. And so they were not happy. And after I graduated from college, you know, we just had this really horrendous fight. I've never had a fight with my parents like that, where we were sort of screaming at each other, yelling. It was really brutal. I ultimately stormed out of the house. I was 18 or 20, 21. And, but we lived in the suburbs. There was, I don't know where, like halfway down the street, I was like, where the hell am I walking to? Like the Greyhound bus terminal was like, 10 miles away. It was like in the middle of nowhere in Missouri. But my dad, to his credit, ran out of the house after me, and he saw how, really passionate I was about this dream. And he said, look, yes, come back in, come back into the house. And at that moment, I think they understood that this is something I really wanted to do, and they gave me sort of the time and space to pursue this passion. And I basically told them, look, I'm going to take 1 year off from college. I was pre-med in college, so I took my MCATs, organic chemistry, all that kind of stuff. I had recommendations from my professors, so I was all ready to go. I could apply at any moment. I said, look, just they'll hold the records at the university. And if this doesn't work out in a year, I will go to medical school and go save people's lives, whatever, like whatever.
Brain surgery.
Really like to draw the help humanity, like whatever, if I have to. Anyway,
So it's interesting because talking about my parents, once I got in, I probably was a pro for close to 3 years or something. I've been in the business for 3 years. And it wasn't until I bounced around, eventually I got the Hulk, like you were saying yesterday, I finally got the Hulk, that Mom and Dad thought I finally got a job, right? It was like, I was 3 years into it. And the only reason was because, and I don't know how it worked with your mom and dad, but because I was finally drawing a character that they had heard of, right? And prior to that, we were doing books that nobody had heard of.
Right.
So they're going, my son draws a Hulk. Oh man, Todd, you finally made it, son. And I'm like, Dad, I've been doing this for 3 years. And I got married 2.5 years ago, right? I can't, what do you think we've been living off of, right? Wanda was still going to school at that point because I'm older than her. So it was, but they needed that piece to be able to brag to the neighbors.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, he does Hulk or Spidey or Batman. They needed something that also the neighbors could hear about. So, so what was your break?
Well, they probably said like, this is the worst likeness of Lou Ferrigno ever. Probably, too.
Oh no, that was
Because that's how they know who the Hulk is.
That's
right?
it. So how did you get your break then? How'd you get in?
So I went to a convention. Well, so I was in St. Louis. I was mailing in samples. I got a lot of rejection letters, which I've shared online, and rightly so. The work wasn't very good.
Right. I got tons.
Yeah.
They were right. In hindsight, they were absolutely.
No, absolutely right.
Yeah.
And then there was one guy in St. Louis that I met at a comic book shop who had broken in. A guy named Rick Burkett. He had done a lot of the Batman Adventures comics, and he said like, "You're wasting your time with these mail samples. You got to go and meet the editors in person." So I said, "Okay, all right." And back then, there's no way to Google any of this stuff, right? So I just assumed you went to a Comic-Con. So I flipped through a comic. There was a convention in New York City that I saw. My roommates from college were working on Wall Street at the time, and I said, "Look, can I crash at your place?" I bought a ticket, went to New York with my portfolio, went to a Comic-Con. I was like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" My first Comic-Con, and I was super intimidated. I saw Terry Austin, Dave Cockrum, Bill Sienkiewicz, my art dealer Al Ramoy, and I just really felt like a fish out of water, and I couldn't even muster up the nerve to kind of show my samples. I showed it to Terry Austin because he was an inker, and I felt like, you know,
Yeah, I sent my samples.
less pressure. You know?
I sent my samples to Terry too.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so, and he was super sweet.
Yeah, he was.
And then I saw Archie Goodwin, who was an editor, and I said, "Oh, I should show it to him." And then I kind of hesitated, and then before I knew it, he was gone. And I felt like, okay, well, at least I got some experience. I got to see what a con was like. I'll be better prepared next time. And then lo and behold, he came back like after like 30 minutes or an hour, and I heard him talking to another colleague of his, and the colleague said like, "Hey, Archie, I thought you were done for the day." And Archie said, "No, I told this guy that I'd come back and look at his samples." And he was like looking around, waiting, like obviously the guy wasn't there. So I'm there with my portfolio, and I go, "Mr. Goodwin, since you're waiting, can you take a look at my samples?" And then he had that look, which is like he kind of rolled his eyes, like, "Oh my God, I got trapped into this."
Yeah. Why did you become an engineer?
Yeah, exactly. And but obviously he knew that I had overheard what he had said, so he was kind of trapped into opening up my samples, my portfolio, looked at the samples. And he was just kind of like, "Oh, this is interesting. You know, do you know what you want to do?" And I was like, I hadn't really prepared for that question. I was just kind of stammering or whatever. And he said, "Look, why don't you come into the offices Monday, and we'll talk then." And so that was it. Like he gave me the invite, and so the whole weekend I was thinking of, you know, those career kind of questions that you might get, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What's your biggest strength, your biggest flaw? And all these like interview questions all set up, you know, with answers. And I went in there Monday. Steve Busolato, who's a pro now, I remember he was an intern there. He welcomed me at the door, brought me in. Archie looked at the same samples and said, like, sometimes when you see things at cons, it doesn't look quite the same as when you're out of that experience. And he said, "The stuff still looks good." And he basically showed it to Carl Potts, who was another editor, and they gave me a job. They didn't ask me a single question about what I wanted to do or my strengths and weaknesses. And that's what I love about comics. It really, you can come from anywhere, and you can have different degrees of education, whatever. They just care about the work. And the
deadline, to some extent.
Yeah,
the question is, you get it done in 20 days.
So then they gave me a tryout story, which I did in like a week, like a 6-page tryout story. And then after that, they gave me a fill-in issue of Alpha Flight.
Wow. So that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. I got my break through Archie Goodwin.
Yeah.
So both of us did.
Yeah,
like we're here.
He's the best. He
here.
is the best.
Archie Goodwin's not on the planet anymore,
Yeah.
but obviously he was willing to give some of us young kids a crack. So Jim and I, thank you, Archie.
I did not know.
Okay, now we're both in. So now we're both in.
But he was at Marvel at the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, Marvel. Yeah. So we're both, no, I broke into Marvel too at the beginning too,
Yeah,
right?
right.
So, because he was doing Marvel's Epic Illustrated line. Archie was the editor-in-chief of the Epic line,
That's right.
when I broke in. And in Coyote, which was my first book, was in the Epic line.
Right.
So Archie was technically my editor, even though I was working with Steve Englehart. But, so both of us are now in, and we're starting to build our careers as we're going, right? So let's just sort of fast forward again to sort of let the people know the recollection, and you're way better at this than I am, of the first time you and I met as peers, if you will, that like you're a pro, I'm a pro, we're both newbies to some extent at this point. We're still trying to find our sea legs in our careers, and then was it Edmonton or no?
It was, yeah, my first Comic-Con where I was an invited guest was Edmonton, and you were signing there.
Okay, Edmonton, for everybody that don't know, Edmonton, Alberta.
It's-
Alberta is in Canada, which is above Montana, right?
The 51st.
Like,
No.
Edmonton.
You're Canadian, so yeah, that's uncomfortable. No, wait, but let me say one other thing though.
Okay, go.
When I got the assignment, the first assignment, just fill an issue.
Go.
And my parents, like, were, sort of kind of watching kind of the dedication. I literally bought this drafting table, put it next to my bed. I would roll out of bed in my underwear. Sorry about that imagery. I'd roll out of bed, sit down, I would just start drawing every day as if I had the job. I was drawing 8, 10, 12 hours a day, every day. So they knew how determined I was to get this. But when I finally did get that first fill-in issue, not even a regular assignment.
My stuff was fill-in.
My dad was at work, but my mom was there when I got the call, and she was ecstatic. She took my hands, and we did like this little dance, like a little jig in the kitchen, and jumping up and down. And she was truly, truly happy for me, and they've been supportive really ever since. But to the point, like, and they're so competitive. I'm gonna just quickly digress. Eventually, they started subscribing to Wizard magazine because they wanted.
Your mom and dad?
Yeah,
Oh,
keep track of my
man.
career.
Shoot.
And I had moved out of the house, and when I would come back for Thanksgiving or Christmas, I'd come home and they would go like, Jim, why are you not #1 on Wizard Hop number 10? Why is Todd McFarlane #1? You're number 3. And I go, God damn it! I cannot make you guys happy. It was very stressful.
My mom was the editor.
Phenomenal. Yeah. But that was real. I mean, they literally would ask me these things. Anyway, but yeah, so I got that break, and ever since they were super supportive, and I paid them back for college and everything.
What's that? You know what? I'm looking over here. Maybe we should both get in this movie.
Oh,
Over here, because you're getting all the limelight. And I'm
yeah.
I think they're actually cutting back and forth.
Sure.
It'd be easier for the camera person if we're both in
Yeah.
frame. If we're both in frame.
Yeah.
Okay, so Edmonton is where we first meet.
Yeah.
My recollection is because again I was sort of new and nervous, whatever else. Every now and then you just go around and just say hi to people, and it was way easier for me to say hi to people like you, which was somebody that was like not high that we revered, right? The people that we revered.
You can say it. I was a nobody. So,
No, both of us were climbing the.
No, you had already gotten a following for sure. Look, this is my memory. I walk into this cavernous room that looked like a gym. There's Todd at a table and this huge line of fans. And this is from your run on Incredible Hulk. You're running on Spider-Man.
Right,
And I
right.
had just done a couple issues of Alpha Flight. And so to me, like, I was like, I had never seen this before. Like, this was a phenomenon. This is a bona fide superstar. And so, yeah, it impressed the hell out of me. But not just that, but the way you treated and interacted with the fans. Because, like, the generation of creators before us, I don't know if they were as friendly to fandom as they could have been. But I saw the care and the kindness you showed to the fans. And so to me, in many ways, we're very similar in age, but you were a role model because you had already hit that stride, and I could see the potential of this business if you have the right work and you hit it with the audience, what you could build this into, because it was not something that I had seen before.
Yeah, so so he's being very kind, but let me guys, stop it. Stop it. Let me talk to that for a moment, because I think it's
It's all an act? Is that what you're saying?
no, it wasn't an act. I find it, although it's kind, people say kind things, I find it a bit frustrating when people say stuff like, oh man, I met that person, they're a celebrity, whoever it is, at whatever medium and occupation you have, and they were so nice, and they were like, why not? I don't understand it, right? Like, to me, it's this simple. There's a golden rule. Treat others as you would have them treat you, right? Like, so I assume that everybody I run into is basically my next door neighbor. Okay, and I would like my next door neighbor to be friendly to me, why not be friendly? And when you get some kind of status, it's weird. People give you extra credit for basically just doing what you should be doing, I think, as a human being, right? Which is just being nice to your fellow human. So the problem is we've run into people who aren't. Those are the head scratchers to me, not the people that are nice. The head scratchers that are not nice, that go in public and basically like are curmudgeon-y that are in there. My attitude that you're talking about, not only was it learned from watching my mom and dad, who I thought were good people, but I went to those conventions and I met people who, when I walked away, I felt like I was 10 feet tall. And I had others that I felt like I was half as tall. And I remember as a fan, as a kid, 16, 17, 18, going to shows, I'm gonna emulate myself after that person and that person and that. So the role models were out there. You just take the examples of the good guys and just keep doing it on and on and on and on. I've seen you out there too, right? You're good. I mean, here's what I would say. I think 80, 90, 95% of people in comic books are usually pretty good people, right? I think that's true across celebrity as a whole. And then you got 5% that are divas off in the corner. Okay, whatever, right? But I don't think we should get any extra credit for being nice to each other, right? So thanks for the applause, but thanks for being nice. You guys are nice too, right? I'm gonna assume every one of you, if you basically were up on the stage and you got to be on the other side of the table, you would be nice to the people in front of you too, right? So
Except this guy right here. He's
oh yeah. That's it. So Jim and I get to have a conversation, and then shortly thereafter you get the.
Well, I came up and we spoke for a little bit.
Yeah, and
so
it was
that
cool
was the
because
first contact.
I knew Jim, like, again, here's somebody who's about my age. We're sort of trying to find our footing. He's doing good. And then when did you get Punisher at that point? Because I remember your explosion came from Punisher, at least for me from a distance.
Yeah.
Was Jim Lee, Punisher, that was like, to me, when you made your big mark, right?
Yeah. So it was probably about a year after, about a year in Alpha Flight.
Yeah.
And then my editor at the time was going to write a new book, Punisher War Journal, and he wanted me to come on board. Yeah, thanks. And at the time, I was living in Berkeley, California, which is a hotbed of left-wing radicalism, and so I felt like I had to hide what I was doing because Punisher isn't super left-wing friendly. So anyway,
So hey, there was a point where I was in Canada, it's Canadian,
Yeah.
in Canada, Vancouver, Canada, and I was drawing G.I. Joe, a real American hero.
yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And if there was an internet, Marvel would have been screwed at that point, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, that was, and I think particularly it was like, I think issue 4 or 5. It was when Wolverine showed up. There was this big Punisher Wolverine crossover, and I felt like that's really kind of where my work and my following, whatever, kind of moved to the next level.
Yeah.
And at the time, I go to New York once or twice a year to the Marvel offices. I really wanted to work on the X-Men. That was one of my favorite characters as a kid, bar none. And I would just kind of, if I ever ran into Bob Harris, who was the editor of the X-Men back then, I would just kind of try to say, hey, Bob, it's Jim, and just kind of try to make my name known and say, hey, if you ever need a fill-in on X-Men, I'm available, in case you didn't know. Like everyone was available. Like that was the hottest book that they had. And I said, it couldn't possibly hurt. But then shortly thereafter, they did contact me and say, hey, we have a fill-in issue of X-Men, would you like to do it? And I did one, and then they liked that. And then they gave me Acts of Vengeance, which was a 3-part storyline where you saw Psylocke or Betsy Braddock turn into Psylocke. And then based on the sales reception to that, they gave me the final gig on X-Men. So you were already on Spider-Man at that point, right?
Yeah, but from my perspective, ladies and gentlemen, between what happened to me in my career and what happened to Jim at that point, I thought Jim, maybe you disagree, but I thought you had the steeper hill to climb, and here's why I'm going to say that. is when I took over Spider-Man, they said it was like at number 21, 22 in sales, right? And there had been a lot of inconsistency, and a lot of the creative teams had been flopped. So they basically sort of said, hey Todd, when you come on here, and David McFarlane was the writer, they go, have at it, right? Like, it's 21, can you guys do anything? And they sort of stepped back and let us do our thing, which is what led to a lot of things I did on Spider-Man. I took that literally as saying, go and try and experiment, go and do some things. Luckily it worked out on Spider-Man. For me, I'm going, man, Jim Lee's coming on the momentum of X-Men. And the X-Men basically had that run, the John Byrne, Chris Claremont, Terry Austin run. And to me, I always thought it was like, would be way more pressure to keep that momentum, to keep all that energy of that book going. Because it was number one, and it was like, there's only one direction to go. And you didn't want to be the person to go down. Like, I was at a place where it was like, we're already down, there's only one direction to go, was up. You have to keep the weight over your head and keep the momentum going. So I go, he's got some big shoes to fill on the mutant books, which is why I never did any of the mutant
Good thing
books.
we didn't talk before I accepted the assignment. You're right. What was I thinking? Who am I to walk in?
No, it's why I intentionally never did any mutant, right? Because for that exact reason, I go, no, this is a tough one.
We're too dumb to know better. At least I was too dumb to know better. Like, I just love drawing. I love these characters so much. It didn't matter. I just wanted to draw them. It was for myself more than anything else. I think I was fortunate that the audience seemed to like the take I had on the characters, and we did well. But look, but you were tearing it up with Spider-Man. There was like a weird thing happening, a renaissance in sales in fandom, where there were fans coming in and turbocharging sales of all the Marvel books, and it was an exciting time to be a creator at Marvel.
Sure. And again, so let's talk a little bit, because I think everybody has to have somewhat of an ego and a competitive nature, and we all have it, right? In those early days, I never really felt a big competition with you directly, because I thought that the way we got there was through different paths, right? I had to try and get the sales up on Spider-Man. I was doing a character that had nothing to do with mutants, so I wasn't having to compete on the mutant side of it. You were coming at the other end. The only competition that would come in would be that it's like, oh man, X-Men's number one, and we can get all the way up, and maybe I can get Amazing Spider-Man up to number 2, right? And so it was like, well, when you're at number 2, being competitive, who's number 1? That was Jim. Right, so it was Jim. Sometimes, depending on what issues, if you had characters or events or something, you could do a flip flop or something like that. But that was it. Other than sort of oddly some sales moments at times, right? And then years later, Spider-Man number 1 comes out. We set the record. I'm looking good, and then that fucker Jim Lee comes along. And he goes, oh yeah, I'm gonna double it. I'm gonna double it on top. And I was like, oh man. So,
no, but you know what? I built on the precedent you set up. I mean, like, if you reversed it, the numbers would have been exactly the reverse, I think. They were on a momentum roll, right? So you went from Spider-Man to X-Force to X-Men, right? Sequentially, it just kept building and building.
Yeah.
Right?
Hey, let me tell you a quick story.
And we had 5 covers.
Yeah, let me tell you a quick story too, that I don't know if I told yesterday. I still have today. Because I don't know if they made you do this, but they made me do it. You have to do like rough sketches to get your covers approved, right? They have to approve like a thumbnail, basically, right? So I still have the 8.5, I would do it on an 8.5 by 11. I have the 8.5 by 11 sketch for the cover of Amazing Spider-Man 300, the one that a lot of people sort of emulate. And within the notes on it, it says, hey guys, since Spider-Man was in the black costume, right? So we have to create this guy named Venom to get it off, right? So we're going, man, I want to get that red and blue costume. So I put a note up there saying, hey, is there any way we can do this pose and do this cover, and then do one, I'll ink one and draw one in black with the black costume, and then I'll do the red and the blue one. And then we'll have like 2 covers for issue 300. I got like 5 of the editors, and my editor's going, dude, who's gonna buy more than one cover for the same issue, right? I still have like the email and the projections are going, nobody in their right mind's gonna buy more than one cover. And I was way ahead of the variant sort of curve.
Yes.
And it took me a lot to basically get them to even just sort of say, well, then could we take the second one and put it on issue 301? And even then, they would begrudgingly did it. Right?
Yeah.
They begrudgingly did it. And then fast forward, Jim and I are doing Spider-Man #1, X-Men #1, and there's like a whole lineup of these things, and then holographs and all those other things that came down the pipeline, and we sort of broke the dam open on it a little bit, right? I mean, I sit there and think, and I'm jumping ahead a bit, that I go, man, you and I got those sales on Wildcats and Spawn with one cover.
I think I had 2. But
I did on one.
yeah.
So I could have done like 8 covers, like I would have, man, we had a big, I think in hindsight, like,
Sure.
we weren't even playing those games, but,
Right.
so anyways, Jim starts going, and let me say, and part of it too, let me say artistically, I never felt in competition even artistically with Jim because I just conceded that, and this is true today, I just conceded Jim was a better artist than I was in terms of just pure drawing. Just he draws the body 10 times better than I do. He just knows anatomy way better than I do. And I think part of my appeal a little bit was sort of the dynamics and the art and the graphics of it, way more than the raw drawing of it. So we weren't even on a collision course at any time of going, oh yeah, I'll draw him on that level.
Yeah, we were in 2 different lanes, I think.
I think so.
But to announce this panel, I posted a drawing. I did a recreation of your Spider-Man #1 cover, where he's kind of bent over with all the cobwebs and stuff like that.
In the crouch?
Yeah, the crouch. And it was so illuminating to me, trying to kind of deconstruct your style. Like, you're more of a cartoonist, and I was trying to do more of, like, you're in the cartoonist lane, like the Kirby lane, and I was more in the Neil Adams, trying to create like what realistic looking superheroes.
Yeah.
But what I got out of that is just the fun that you put in the lines, the energy that you created. Yes, you're breaking anatomy, but this is comics. I actually also agree, like, I don't think comics should look like photographs. So there should be, tracings of drawings. It shouldn't look exactly like, so I make up my buildings. My anatomy back then was pretty exaggerated even today, and I do think, certainly while I was working on Batman Hush 2, is like trying to incorporate more of what you were doing, just having fun with the drawings. Like, there's weird lines you put down because they look cool, and I think sometimes we get away from that when we think too much about trying to make it look realistic or correct. And I think there's a room for correct anatomy and everything, but if you only do that, it looks a little lifeless and boring, and so you got to find that right balance of having something that looks exaggerated and unreal and something that you can't get anywhere else, and also having that realism so that you at least look at it and go like, okay, I know what that is, versus like some sort of cubist looking cartoon that makes no sense.
I had plenty of people come up during my Spider-Man time, especially my peers, and go, so talk to me, how does he get into that pose? I don't care. Who cares that his ass shouldn't be there? So to your point, it just looked cool. It looked cool.
There's a Spider-Man cover with his arm, his leg is like this.
Yeah. Look at here. I'll tell you a quick story. When they did the first Spider-Man movie, Sam Raimi because I knew people that were working on the movie, and he had a bunch of my Spider-Mans there. They were making the first movie, and they go, he told some of them, I want to have this influence of this kid McFarlane he's doing here, so let's do it. So they went and got people in the costume, and they said, hey, let's put them in, and they found out people couldn't go in those poses. No, it's true. This is all true. And then they went, oh, we'll go and get people in costume that are double jointed. They still couldn't get into the poses. And then they got triple jointed. They still couldn't do it. They went and got people from Circus du Soleil over the contortionists in Vegas. They still couldn't do it. And they went, let's just do it digitally, right? So they did. So they end up having to just sort of go, if you want to do this funky pose really quickly for a brief moment, you have to not pay attention to where the spine connects to the body and the hip and stuff. You do. You have to do it. But he's a spider, and I didn't do any of it. So which is why Jim was way better than me, because like good drawers were going, no, I'm not going to do. I was like, I'm not very good at drawing, so I'm just going to keep breaking these rules. And Spider-Man worked. It was a character that worked, that I could break all of it.
Right.
Now, at this point, our careers are going, and now we're starting to get to the apex, because we've only got 15, 20 minutes of getting close to image, right? So here's what's happening behind the scenes. I don't know if Jim even knows this, but I'm having constant conversations with Eric Larson and Rob Liefeld. And I don't know if you were the same way. You and I talked a little bit too, that sometimes when you've got a page and it's going to be a long grind to get through the page, you get on the phone with your buddy and you just sort of talk to each other.
Yeah.
And it's sort of white noise.
Right, but that was like, I think, a daily occurrence. Like, so there was no internet, so to keep yourself engaged with drawing, I got one of those telemarketer headsets, and I would be on the phone all day. I would call you, I'd call Rob, I'd call other creators, and you just talk while you're drawing, and that's how you kept yourself sort of entertained while you're doing it.
And could get through the day.
Yeah.
So as part of those conversations, and again, Jim is aware of this, so he can jump in at any time here, that Rob was going to go do his own book. Eric was talking about doing his own book, and I had basically gotten to the end of my rope with Marvel and left, and we were going to have one, and I were going to have our first child and stuff. So I was going, no, I'm thinking of doing it too. And then it just sort of easily was, I think, part of a discussion. Why do one over there, one over here, and one over here? Everybody's been doing that historically, that walked away from the big companies. Why don't we all do them in one spot, right? That was sort of the impetus of that. Rob Liefeld probably was the one that was sort of leading the charge and all that, and quickly said, can I go get Jim Valentino to join? Right? So we had four of us. The original intent of Image Comic Books at that point was four of us. We were heading to New York, and we were going to tell the head of Marvel that we were quitting, right? And this is where, to me, ladies and gentlemen, is really the foundation of why I think that Image Comic Book is still here 30 years later. The biggest, best, happy accident is and was, I'm in New York. I don't know where I would end up being where I was, but I end up being in the same room as Jim Lee, right? It was an auction, or what? I don't even know.
It was a Sotheby's auction.
It was
First
a Sotheby's auction.
Sotheby's auction of comic book art.
Right, and Jim asked a simple, sort of innocuous question. Hey, Todd, what are you doing here? We knew each other by this time, and I tell him why we're here. We got a meeting the next morning, and I just give him the rundown. And for me, and Jim can give you his side of it, for me, at the end of the conversation, or at some point, you said, that's interesting, do you mind if I come along, right? And I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, I have said it before, and I believe it with every fiber of my body. Jim saying yes, Jim Lee, saying yes, was the moment. And the reason I say that is because at that point, and you know this to be true, Rob Liefeld was a bad boy, he was a rebel, right? Todd was a bad boy, I was a rebel, right? We spoke our mind way too much. Eric Larson, he was sort of goofy, but he was fun and he was a bit of a rebel. Jim was the consummate employee from my perspective. And I thought, when I remember leaving that going, oh my God, this is the thunderclap moment. Because when we walk into that meeting tomorrow, they think they're meeting with Rob and Jim and Todd, the two rebel. And to some point, good riddance to those guys, right? But if we come in and Jim Lee is with us, that's going to be the shock, because the choir boy, the guy who's supposed to be the good guy, is also with them. It meant that anybody, yes, he was good. He would have been a good politician. It was, if Jim Lee could go, it meant anybody could go. And that was the fear that, and the message they needed to have. So Jim says, hey, and then, I don't know, very quickly, you said, hey, can Wills come along, right? So again, that's, you fill in the details beyond that, but to me, all I wanted is like, fuck, we got Jim.
And then I think Mark Sylvester was there, and then we.
So that becomes after you. So you
Yeah,
fill in that,
yeah,
and
so-
I'll add Mark in a moment.
Yeah, no. So, but I joined because of you. So, like I said, that I did see that before too, actually. Look, in the image meetings, like, we did a meeting with Steve Jeppy, owner and distributor of all our comics, and Todd was topless the whole time walking around at San Diego Comic-Con. Rob was bouncing up and down on a bed, like, I don't know what he was doing.
Guys, at the end of the day, I'm proud of what I got.
I had a 1-year-old baby in a sling trying to keep her asleep at like 11 o'clock at night. Anyway, but no, I joined because I wanted to work with you. I obviously respected you and looked up to you, admired you from that moment I saw you in Edmonton. Look, there's a part of me, I look like I could be a doctor, pretty straightforward.
That's going to come into play.
But there is a piece of me that does like doing the unexpected, doing something daring. I actually do take a lot of risks in my life, and having 9 kids is certainly one of those. But you can't go backwards though, apparently. Anyway, so I actually, I might have sounded kind of like hesitant to join, but I was in. I just needed to know more details so that I could explain it to my parents. Like, what are you doing? And my wife, what are you doing again? You're leaving the top-selling book to go do your own company? What's wrong with you? But I felt confident in your vision of the company, and I felt like if we all banded together, we were stronger together, and this is the way to do it. And so, look, I did a lot of other math type stuff. I figured out what was the best-selling independent comic book at that time. It was Aliens vs. Predator. They sold like 100,000 units. And so I was just hedging my bets and trying to figure out, can I make a living doing this, leaving a very comfortable job at Marvel and breaking out my own. And our first book sold 800,000 copies, right? So it blew it out of the water. But look, I've said this to you, I've said it in other interviews, I would not have joined Image Comics if it weren't for you. So.
Wow, Image Comics, let me tell you, Image Comic Book doesn't succeed to the level without Jim. So again, there was a combo that ended up being there. So I'll throw it back at you. So here's the fun for me. It was 3 of us sort of talking, Rob Liefeld, Eric Larson, myself. We go, yeah, let's do it. What the heck, right? I mean, again, we didn't know what we were doing. Yeah, what the heck? Boom, boom. We join in. Jim Valentino jumps on, so we got 4. We head to New York with 4. We get Jim Lee and Will Portacio, who's also doing a mutant book. So, like, all of a sudden 4, 5, 6. And then that night, I'm walking back to my hotel, and in the lobby, don't know why he was there, and Mark Silvestri.
Art auction.
He was there too for it?
Yep.
Okay, he was there for the same reason, I guess. I give him the sales pitch, like, because I'm good. I can be like Mussolini from the balcony, right? I can go. And I give it to him, and it's about 11 o'clock at night, and I go, but you got to tell me by 7:30 in the morning, because you got an 8 o'clock meeting. And to his word, he phones me up at 7:30 and goes, I'm in. So we had 7, we went there at 4, and I had 7, and the additions were Mark Silvestri was doing Wolverine, and the X-Men artist, and what was Wolf doing at that point?
X-Men.
Yeah, X-Men. We just took the mutant, basically the 3 big boys on the mutant, and we went in, and we basically said we were leaving. Now again, they distorted, I believe, what it was that we asked. We didn't ask for anything. We didn't ask for trademarks and copyright and all those things that they said. We just said, from my recollection, we're leaving. Here's our reasons why. And if it was me, I'd close the barn doors, because next week you might have another 7 leaving. But we're gone. There's nothing you can sort of offer. I mean, maybe you're going whole sex, Todd.
That's some crazy talk.
Because Jim was in that meeting, so.
No, it wasn't that meeting. No. It was literally a meeting to say, we're done, we're never going to work for you again. But then the next day, you're like, let's go over to DC and tell them the same thing. And I'm in my head going, I've never done any work for DC. I don't know anyone in DC.
Never stepped foot in DC.
Maybe if this all blows up, maybe I need to work at DC, but maybe someday I'll run DC. Who knows? But he dragged me over to DC. We had this meeting with people I've never met before, and I'm like, nah, never gonna work for you guys. You've never asked me, but no.
No, that's the horror. Let me tell you, this is the horror. DC was more the horror. Because the way that it worked, if you didn't like Marvel, you went to DC, and if you didn't like DC, you went to Marvel, and you just kept ping-ponging back.
They were so confused.
And when we came over, they saw Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee, they just went, we hit the mother load. And we said, Rob Liefeld's with us. Good. And remember, there were like 15 editors. They gathered, we were in a big room, they gathered a lot of people.
Yes.
They were all like, oh my God, we just got their top hitters. And they go, you guys got anything to say? And the answer was, yeah, me and Jim ain't working for you.
I didn't say that, you said that.
I said that. And there was a couple people I knew really well, and they were so, afterwards, they went so, I swear I understand this. Jim Lee has never worked for us, and you brought Jim Lee over here to tell us Jim Lee will not ever work for us.
Yes.
I go, yes, yeah, that was it, because you might want to close your barn door too, because you might get the seven new people that will leave for the exact same reason, right? And then from there, Image. So we don't have a lot. So
I think we're out of time.
We can scurry through Image for a couple.
You should
minutes.
tell the batting cage story because that's my favorite.
No, I won't do it. I won't do that.
Okay.
I'll save that because that's way too good of a story.
Okay.
To shortcut.
Okay. All right.
To shortcut.
Okay.
But so Jim and I start. We go to Image Comic Book. We got to each come up with our own characters, and from there we're off. So what's your fond memories of those days? Before we then divide the other side of the X, which it'd be the next panel in 12 years.
Yeah.
Of you going to the left and me going to the right.
I think it was because it was the most ridiculous business ever. I always tell people we were young and stupid and we made every mistake in the book, but we still survived. Like none of us had MBAs, none of us had started a business before. We all thought we knew kind of like what running a business was like, and we were trying to learn how to do that and draw our books. That's why the books are so late, because we're completely distracted by this other stuff.
We're learning another language called business.
Yeah.
Of which we had never learned before. I keep telling people I think I'm bilingual.
Yeah. We had never really
And I'm
interacted with a lot of retailers before. I just think that it was just the most non-traditional way of running a business ever. Like I said, I just remember these crazy meetings where you were walking around topless and, and just telling people, we're not doing this. It was a lot of like, we're never gonna work for you again. I just remember that was kind of like the refrain, like daring people to like fire us.
Yeah, and we gotta get, so let me just sort of see if I can end at least from me, and then you can have the last word.
No.
Like, I knew there was a moment that is like, there are moments in life that just get burnt in your mind, and there's a moment that I knew Image was going to survive, and that over my dead body it wouldn't, because I knew for one fact, ladies and gentlemen, Image Comic Books was going to last in my lifetime, because I was going to put that logo on Spawn, and I was never, even if Image was one book, it was going to survive with my one book. I was never going to go, because Jim knows I'm super militant. But when we walked out of that meeting, when we went to that fateful meeting, Jim was there, Rob Liefeld was there, although he left halfway through it to go pick up his girlfriend. And then I was there, and actually my wife was actually in the room holding our baby off in the corner. But the moment came when we went into the elevator, and I don't know if it resonated with you, but it just was like, I see it. It's like a movie. I was sitting here, Jim was right next to me, and as we're getting in the elevator, Tom DeFalco, the editor-in-chief at that point, we were meeting with Terry Stewart, who was like the publisher, but the editor-in-chief came, who was in that meeting too. And as we're standing there and the doors are closing like a movie, right? The elevator doors are closing. His closing words to me, I'll never forget, was, hey, if it doesn't work out, you're welcome back. That burned me. And when that door closed, I remember that we were going to go, because I turned to Jim, I remember saying, they think we're stupid. And I knew that we weren't stupid for two big reasons. And this is why I'm glad that this man came forth. I knew that this was a guy who could have been a doctor. How dare you? It's true.
If you put it that way.
It's It's true. That was the thought I had. I go, I heard he could have gone and become a doctor. How can he be dumb? He's going to be a doctor, right? And my dad had been in the printing business for 40 years. And if there's one thing that I could do, and I knew I could get help, was basically printing stuff. And I go, he's smart. I can figure out printing. We're okay. And that last sentence going, if you fail, I took it as if you fail, not if it doesn't work out. If you fail, you're welcome back. And I just went, no. So the day I die, there's going to be an image of I, at least on one book. And luckily, the momentum, and we're here now 30 years later, the great pleasure I have with Image is that it will outlive us. Both 100%. Both of us. I'm very So everybody, Mr. Jim Ray, appreciate it. Thank you for coming. We're doing a signing downstairs. If you guys are lucky enough with the ticket, we're doing a signing. Enjoy your convention. Everybody be kind to each other. Let's go.